Okay, so now for the socks.
So Matt Wheeler, the shoeless or sockable therapist, is going to show you his socks of the day.
Okay, so my socks of the day are foxes,
Oh, cute. Oh my
right?
gosh, those are so cute.
Yeah, these are fun ones. And
Yeah.
and like they've just got like a little pine tree on
Yeah.
there
I thought
with
they
a
were at
little.
Christmas at first because I saw the tree first before I saw the
Oh,
fox. So, but
seriously?
yeah, no, I saw the
No,
tree.
they are
Yeah.
just some sort of winter. I shouldn't say winter because there's no snow. It could be the summer, but it's a fox
True.
just chilling. Couple
Yeah.
foxes on there.
There you go. There you go. So, what do you have for us today?
Okay, so the we did the first principle of sexual health last week by the as done by the Harvey Institute. And so I was going to jump into the second principle.
Okie dokie.
Um, and now I'm suddenly trying to bring it up as fast as possible because I had actually
Because
shut
you
down
gotta
all my
switch.
tabs.
Oh, did you?
I shut down all my tabs because I'm like, I wonder if that'll help my internet connection, and it didn't.
You're here. It's good.
Okay, so yeah, I'm here. Um, Let me put it up on the screen.
Hmm.
Gosh, there we go. Share, share, and let's share this one. Okay, so the second principle is non-exploitative. And so,
Oh, there it goes. I was gonna say it's not coming up quite yet, but now it's okay. The six principles of sexual health, the Harvey Institute. That's all we see.
okay,
There you go.
non-exploitative. In order
Got
to
it.
have healthy sex in our lives, it needs to be non-exploitative. And so I have I've gone through and changed this just slightly from what you'll find like on the Harvey Institute's website. And only because I tried to, well, one, I tried to condense it a little bit from where I was doing like a couples workshop or that sort of thing. Um, and so, and I also tried to make it a little more like couple specific, even though I don't have permission from them to do that. But so this isn't their exact verbiage, and so I have to take some ownership that if it's not right. Exploitation is when someone uses a person uses their power or influence to get what they want. Most people do not strive to become skilled at sexual exploitation. Exploitative power compromises another person's ability to give their full consent. So, our last video, we talked a little bit about consent, and we have to understand that that exploitative power compromises the ability to give full consent. Sometimes saying no might place a person in danger, such as a person being physically or emotionally or financially at risk, such as risk of losing a job or a spouse cutting them off from finances. It might make them financially at risk of being manipulated or being controlled. Um, it's the ability to take advantage of a less mentally capable person, including someone who is not emotionally mature, is one example of exploitation. And this is where I've found personally, it's really interesting when people have conversations about like age of consent, for instance. Legally, I'd have to look. Most US states are, I should say, I think it's most are 18 is what we deem the age of consent. Um, but what I've found is interesting to really understand is consent involves the ability to know like what impact an experience may have on somebody, right? Like when I give a consent form to a client, I try to let them know the risks as well as the benefits of the therapeutic process so that they can figure out, do you consent to the risks and the benefits? And so you look at the concept of consent, especially something of a sexual nature, how much can an individual consent to knowing how this is going to impact them or not? So if it's non-exploitative, somebody has consent and they're capable and they're not being exploited by somebody that's in a position of power. So a person in a cognitively impaired state can't give full consent. Intoxication is often used as an excuse to cross the sexual non-exploitation principle. I'm going to keep going. Sexual relationships help to avoid exploitation when the relationship is equal, such as a peer-to-peer, and not an unequal boss-employee, teacher-student, doctor-patient, president-intern type of relationship, right? And so, because in any of those situations where you have a position of power, and this can occur in a peer-to-peer relationship too, where somebody feels powerless in the relationship and they feel like they have to consent, otherwise they're going to be exploited in some way. It is exploitation to take advantage of that power, even in a peer-to-peer relationship. But it shows why it's even more important when the power dynamic is obvious. That's why therapists can get in a lot of trouble, rightfully so, for being sexually inappropriate, sexual at any way with a client, whether they deem it appropriate or not. The most common form of sexual exploitation between partners in a sexual relationship is when one or both partners unilaterally changes the assumed or clearly stated couple's sexual agreement. This is usually called an affair, infidelity, cheating, stepping out, or betrayal. The exploitative behavior is the cover-up, the denial, and the pretending that this did not happen and was the taking advantage of their partner's trust. And so typically when I'm working with a partner, I'm going to stop the share here. Typically when I'm working with a partner or a couple where there has been exploitation, it's not, although it's painful, oh, you had an affair or whatever the behavior is, that's painful. But typically the most painful part is the exploitation of the trust. And you can't have healthy sexual relationship in your life when you are exploiting the trust of another person. And so I'm curious, Tammy, like I could keep going and explore this. We could also do a lot of other questions here, but I'm curious, like, do we need to pause and stop and talk about anything specifically, or should
Well,
I?
well, I'm curious because you're like, like peer to peer, but unless it's exploitive. But this is a pretty common scenario that I hear that
Mhm.
there's a financial imbalance.
Right.
So would you perceive that as exploitive if like all of the money is controlled by the person who is, is being sexually exploited? I don't know. I perceive that as a power up position of like you are completely dependent on me and my purse strings in order for your
No,
livelihood, so to speak.
oh, totally. So
Okay.
here's the tough part, right? It depends on the relational agreement. And that's why there's that
Mm.
line in there that is so important because let's say, for instance, in my relationship, uh, let's say I just say, "Hey, honey, I'm too stressed with work, and you're better with finances anyway. I want you to take care of all the finances. Like, and if I'm gonna make a big purchase, I'll come and talk to you. And if she and I have that agreement, right, and we're both comfortable with it, then she's less likely to be in a position of exploitation because we've made these decisions together. And so let's say there's an assumed agreement, meaning since the relationship began, one partner has always taken care of the finances and maybe has made, comments like, well, if you ever, you can't ever leave because, you know, I, I have all the finances or I'll ruin you or whatever. Okay, that is now like, yes, this is where we cross over into exploitation because we are no longer equal because I hold so much power and I'm using that power to get what I want. Now, it may not be sexual exploitation that's occurring in the relationship, but the relationship itself, if there's any exploitation, you are not going to have a high likelihood of a healthy sexual relationship. Exploitation does not work well for people to be able to even give their full consent sexually. So
Okay, so what I'm hearing you say is that could be a byproduct, but the overall exploitative nature of the relationship in various forms would contribute to that.
absolutely, right? Because if we think too much, well, no, it needs to be sexual exploitation. No, you won't have a healthy sexual relationship with any form of exploitation in the relationship. And, if I were to, um, I can understand that this could be a very touchy subject, but I want you to even consider this way. If one person's like, well, if you don't do this, I'm not having sex, right? Like that in and of itself is like, okay, that's exploitative, meaning, we are not working together. I'm using something, my position of power, whether it's my knowledge that you desire sex, and I'm going to use that position of power to get what I want, that in and of itself is going to diminish the ability for a couple to have a healthy sexual relationship. So it's exploitation in any nature. And this is where I believe, like the quote says in there, most people don't set out to be exploitive in nature. But I do think it's a good conversation to have. When in our relationship have you felt that there has been exploitation? When have I been exploitative to you? Can I talk about when I felt you have to me? I think I talked last time that consent conversation, the more I've understood consent, the more curious I was to go to my spouse and be like, hey, has it ever been non-consensual to you? Like, have you ever felt any sense of non-consent? Right? Wonderful question to talk about. Same thing with the exploitation. At any time in our relationship, has it felt exploitative in nature? Because that is going to diminish even just a healthy sexual relationship in addition to healthy relationship all over.
But here's the rub. You and your spouse have a good, healthy relationship. You're willing to go to those places. When there is addiction and betrayal in the mix,
Oh, it's
and
tough.
there's a power up. I mean, because and there's multiple. This is not like a one off. When there's particularly a financial, and I'm going to use male addict, female partner. The male addict is controlling all the money, gives like an allowance, for
Right.
all of the essentials
Which,
to the spouse. And then they're still abusing the money because they're off doing whatever it is that they wish to do. And, so it's that very selfish,
right.
I mean,
Oh,
to
it's
me, that
super
is
selfish.
massively exploitive and fear
It is
inducing
massively
for a
exploitive.
partner, and then there can be that transactional, well, if you do this, I'll give you, a little
Right.
more money.
Right. And that's where so often I've heard people, well, I wouldn't have needed to step out or whatever in the relationship if our sex life had been better. And it's like, yeah, but you failed to understand the exploitative nature in your relationship. How are you going to experience a healthy sexual relationship? You're just using that to blame, and that's not going to work. And so, yes, you're absolutely correct. Yeah, in that situation, I can have that conversation with my spouse because we have a healthy relationship. But ultimately, and I'm sharing this because I want, if you're in a relationship where it feels exploitative in nature in any part, we need to hash this out. And now, if a person needs to spend time with their therapist, figuring out How do I approach this? Absolutely. Spend the time to figure out you cannot have a healthy relationship when there's exploitation. And that,
and it yeah, and
and
it feels like it's probably kind of probably pervasive. It isn't probably just in a certain category,
oh,
though it could be, right?
right. It is probably showing up in multiple categories. I will tell you what I find interesting, and I have to, like, although I understand it, I've often found that the when the individual with compulsive behavior is discovered, oftentimes that power imbalance can shift because now
Um,
finally she's like, oh, I have information, and she's hurt and she's scared, right? If we're going with the
mhm,
he she
mhm,
thing.
mhm,
And like, and then what ends up happening is that she's hyper vigilant and trying to make sure that she's not gonna get hurt again, and I can see that occasionally that exploitative position comes into play. Now her position of power is now over him. Well, that actually doesn't work either, but it does make sense why it occurs. And
mhm,
so we have to figure out how to get out of exploitation in our relationship or out of positions of power and figure out how do we become equals as partners. And it takes a lot of work. And we have to look at our recovery work and have conversations together. Hey, talk to me about the positions of power. Are you feeling like I'm exerting power and authority? And you're not allowed to have a voice now that the roles have switched. No matter what, we don't want exploitation or positions of power occurring without consent, right? If we have positions of power and we've both agreed to it, it's part of our relational agreement, then you're most likely you're fine. That could be considered just a division of labor, if that makes any sense.
oh yeah, yeah. And some of us are better at some things than others, or just from a practical standpoint, it's like, okay, these are about equal in nature. So yeah, division of, but you even started out like, hey, I'm overstretched, and can we do? You had the conversation, not, I'm going to cover all the finances, and you're going to be put on a,
An allowance.
yeah,
Gross.
yeah. Yeah, no, and it doesn't work. So somebody's saying, I'm going to just interrupt this. Somebody's saying, like, we have people in this group, but they're saying they're having trouble. I'm not sure what the issue is, because we have people coming in. So uh, let me know the issue, and I'll see if I can figure it out. But there's a number of people in, so I'm not quite sure what the issue is that people are expressing. So there's no like, unlike our drop-in groups, and I'm sorry for those on the recordings, but we have drop-in groups, and those that go to drop-in groups have to be let into the groups. But this is just, you're joining, that you're not seen and heard on these particular forums. So if you're watching this on a video, come join us live. Okay, sorry.
Oh, it's interesting. You put in the chat age of consent.
Yes,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
went and looked at it because I was curious, and I was like, I know it
No,
varies.
it's
Yeah.
fascinating, and I think in different European countries it's even lower. But again, what we have to look at, and we have to be always be very careful of, is the potential power imbalance, right? Like, um with age, with income, with all sorts of with positions of authority. It's a very, very interesting conversation.
So I'm going to skip to the second question because it's about consent. So, should nobody ever have sexual contact with another if they've been drinking or using marijuana because there's inherent lack of consent?
Well, I don't know that it's an inherent lack of consent, right? Like, I've had couples who, let's say in their own relationship, they've had conversations about it. Hey, just so you're aware, if we're using marijuana and or alcohol, like, and I'm down, I'm down, right? Like, again, what's your relational agreement? So, but I love the question because it's a good conversation, but let's have that conversation when we're sober. And then let's talk about it. Hey, I went ahead, you were under the influence and you were getting frisky with me and I went with it. And I was wondering, now that you're sober, do you remember? How was it? Let's have a conversation. But if you don't have the conversation before, um, then I'm going to suggest we would need to be very careful, because if you don't have the conversation before, you could potentially be, I mean, even criminally liable. I think it's understanding, and I don't know if you guys have ever seen it. If you go look up a video, it has a decent amount of swear words. You can look up a clean version of it, but there's a video called T is Consent on YouTube. And it's a short video, and it does a beautiful job at equating consent for sex with with giving somebody tea, serving somebody tea. And and so I would say in general, if we have not had the conversation before, I think it's a dangerous thing, because yes, there is an inherent lack of consent. And I would even say, what does the length of our relationship look like? You know, if my wife and I have a conversation and we've been married X number of years, and we've over time established a relationship of trust, and we have a conversation around it, and we come up with a relational agreement that works for both of us, we talk about before, depending on the amount of intoxication, if there was some, during and after, right? And that's any experience. You're going to establish consent before, throughout, and after, as a way of creating safety in a relationship. So in general, yeah, I think it's a dangerous thing, but I do think a couple is able to navigate that together by having good conversation.
So we're gonna skip to the self-protection and boundaries are, wait, self-protection and boundaries around healthy sex are very different than exploitation, and I think you should clarify the difference.
Self-protection and boundaries around healthy sex. Um, I don't know that. I'm curious where I muddied this. So I guess I'm just trying to make sure I understand. Exploitation is the use of power to get what I want, at your expense, essentially. Self-protection, I'm just in my mind trying to think of, like, I mean, there's
I'm
lot.
wondering, so I'm this is the story I'm telling myself, is that when you were talking about when it flips, with the partner flipping and they're, if they're going,
Oh
so
gosh.
does that make sense?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
that okay, that not only does that make so much better sense, um, but I actually think it is very thoughtful. You're correct. So that when that dynamic shifts, not only does the person who has been exploited now have to figure out, what does self-protection look like? What do boundaries look like? Keeping in mind that boundaries are all about needs and need fulfillment. I sometimes might swing a little bit, because I'm trying to figure out now, for the first time in my relationship, what self-protection and boundaries even look like. I'm not suggesting that there won't be somewhat of an unhealthy swing as we try to figure this out, because it's messy. Recovery is super messy. And so, absolutely, I'm not even suggesting, I don't think most partners, when there is a shift in the power imbalance, some partners, I think, go to that place of sometimes exploiting the other, as a way of self-protection. And we have to look at it and go, what's right? What's healthy here? And I can't be the one, I'm not going to be able to define what that looks like for each couple. But there have been times where I have been a little nervous by some of the requests that have been made in an effort to try and establish self-protection and boundaries, where I'm like, boy, I can see why the partner is asking for this thing, like a specific post-nuptial contract, for instance. And I can appreciate their attempt at getting safety, but I do ask myself, wow, is that healthy? Or is that in and of itself becoming another form of exploitation? I don't have an answer. But I do think it's something we should explore as individuals within our groups, with other couples, like with each other, because there is no doubt everybody deserves self-protection, and learning healthy boundaries is an absolute must. We just don't want to swing it over to basically being exploitative.
Well, and everybody deserves self-protection, but the path you're communicating, which is communication, is like then you are building trust on each side of the equation. Both partners are working to build trust rather than, okay, I've been exploited, so now I'm going to exploit, or like the revenge, whatever. Like none of those things are healthy. And I say it probably almost every webinar, what is the goal? And if the goal is to have a healthy relationship, what needs to happen in order to approach that? Because yeah, I mean, you can go back and forth on, the flip flop of that, but I don't know if anybody's ever
Well,
happy in that.
what I would say is that as a couple or even as an individual, we're checking this in regularly because we are needing to figure out how to develop an equal relationship. Now, keep in mind, we might be doing that where neither of us have ever even seen that modeled at any point in our life. And we haven't had it in our relationship. Now we're doing this trauma recovery, trying to figure out how to do this, and yet we are clueless. And so I'm not suggesting to any of you out there in internet land that this is easy. I'm just trying to show that it is something we need to be considering, talking about, exploring. It's interesting how many times when I present to a couple, we need to work on figuring out how both of you have equality and both of you get your needs met in the relationship. One of them is like, "Oh, please, how do we do that?" And so it is a very common problem, especially when there has been such hurt and trauma in the relationship.
So interestingly, John Taylor's webinar series right now is on maturity in relationships, and you hit on the same thing he did yesterday too. With this isn't what was modeled. Like healthy relationships were probably not modeled. When those relationships go so askew, there's probably not been lots of young learning on how to do a relationship and have healthy communications and all that. So, and especially when there's addiction and betrayal and all of this added to the mix, and then how do we navigate this, and move, forward in a different way? Um, so can we pop to some questions and hold?
Yeah.
Okay. Betrayed here. It's been 7 months since discovery, and I'm just about to start writing a boundary document. Previously, I've verbalized them or emailed them. Up to now, my partner considers my boundaries as controlling and the natural consequence as punishment. So here, uh, so here we go. The boundaries are going to increase in quantity, intention, and follow through. I'm nervous. My partner's go to when he can't hold space for my emotions, or when we fight to say he's done with the relationship and he's ready to walk. I'm not in a financial place to have, if you X, then we break up and you move out. What can be a natural consequence for when he pulls this, when the fight is over, the changes, he changes his mind and says, of course he wants to be together. We already don't have sex or physical contact or sleep in the same room because of weekly emotional and physical safety breaches. So there's a lot there,
Well, there's a
but
lot here.
yeah.
I'll tell you, one of the things that when I, if I can, when I do a session alone with like a betrayed partner, for instance, I will often ask, tell me about your boundaries, right? And it's not uncommon that somebody will say, oh, well, if he has a slip, he sleeps on the couch for however many nights or whatever. Let me assure you that if that's the case, that is not a natural consequence. I'm not suggesting that it isn't common. That is a logical consequence. A natural consequence is when if he slips, the natural consequence to him slipping is um you feeling hurt. Like, and then you feeling hurt, and being sad, and maybe your instinct is to pull away, not even your intention, but let's say your instinct is to pull away. You pulling away is the natural consequence, right? It's what happens without even thinking. Just like speeding in a car, the natural consequence to speeding is like poor fuel efficiency and wear and tear on the tires, right? Like and so I'm saying it because I'm trying, as I'm reading through this, when I heard you use the word natural consequences, I'm not sure you meant it. Like, I think you're just saying, what should the consequences be?
I
And
agree.
so to make it clear, um, a lot of people in recovery and a lot of betrayed recovery groups, and I say a lot, I'm just stating based on my experience with the years doing this. In a way to try and get their needs met, people start exploring, oh, well, what should the consequence be? And so as a group, we almost start developing like, well, you need to sleep on the couch or you need to move out. Those are all what we would call logical consequences. Well, those often feel like a punishment. When it's not a punishment, it's related to the need of the person who's been hurt. And so I've asked a lot of partners over the years, what do you need when he slips? Like, for instance, when he slips up, well, I need honesty. Okay. So if he slips and gives you honesty, what happens next? Well, I'm in pain, but it actually helps build trust. Okay. So then what do you need after that? Well, I guess I need him to open up to me and maybe tell me what was going on for him, right? Like, and we start talking about what the actual needs are if a slip were to occur or at any other point in the relationship. Most of the time the need is for actual greater intimacy, and I mean intimacy like emotional. Sometimes it's physical. I need a hug, right? And so I try and tell my partners, like, I get why we create these ideas of you need to sleep on the couch or you need to move out of the house. Okay. But oftentimes we create a boundaries list based on what we think we're going to need in the future or what all these other betrayed partners told me that they needed, and we haven't figured out for ourselves what we actually need. And I've told people, well, until you know what you need, you might just say, hey, uh I mean, again, this is hard, but because it's almost impossible for me to know what you need, it might be, you know what, for right now, don't when we're laying in bed, just don't touch me. And or hey, for right now, and I'm going to make this up, I just don't feel comfortable with you being around me naked. Whatever it is, you're trying to tune into what you actually need. And when your partner can bring you what you actually need, you rebuild trust. And so boundaries cannot be about like this punishment that follows a consequence based on a list you created, because my need around something right now, although a list can be helpful, and I'll explain that in a minute, what I need right now in this moment is about me tuning into what I need and figuring out if I can ask you for it. um I don't blame people if they say, hey, my partner betrayed me and I needed them to move out for a couple of weeks, right? Okay. But, and I might write a list of what I think I might need so that in the moment of hurt and pain, I can look at the list and ask myself, is this actually what I need? Because to give somebody a needs list of here's the possible mistakes you could make and here's the list of my needs is almost like saying I'm going to give you a list of all the meals I need to eat for the next year, and on June 4th, I'm going to want this meal. It's kind of like, I don't know, I may not be in the mood for that. It may not be what I actually want or need in that moment. And I hope this makes sense, Tammy.
No, it does. So a couple of things. So I am firmly in the camp of, I can ask for things, and if my partner is unable to meet them, I can ask him to go sleep on the couch, or I can ask him to do something, but ultimately I can't make anybody do anything. So then it's going to be, what am I going to do? If you're unable to meet this boundary, then I'm going to go sleep on the couch, or I'm going to go for a walk, or I'm going to physically remove myself from the thing. I'm a little concerned with the, I'm going to make more boundaries. I had, this is a real example. I had somebody, it was an addict partner, who said, my wife has a list of 150 boundaries. And I was like, as a partner, I wouldn't remember to be able to remember them all. Like, it just feels like there's no winning, in that. And so I think simpler, fewer, but identify what your needs are. It isn't like 100 different things. and and yes, you have an addict partner that clearly is not on a recovery path, because I hear resentment and anger and all of those kind of things, rather than, gosh, I have a goal of meeting you and being in a relationship with you. But yeah, boundaries. I need to make myself safe. And if he goes, you're trying to control me, please watch Debbie McCrae's webinars. Like, she does a brilliant job. She can do a 4-part talking boundary, just like do 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 do. I have to think about each part. But it's like, I understand that's the story you're telling yourself. I'm going to go for a walk, or I'm going to go take a bubble bath. I'm going to go do whatever I'm going to do. But I think it's really important to identify it, like Matt was talking about earlier, with things not in the moment. You don't talk about, should we have sex when we're intoxicated? When you're intoxicated, you talk about that, in advance. So same with the boundaries. It's like, this is, I'm just looking for my needs to be met. These are the things I'm looking for. I would love to be moving towards you, in a relationship. I'm just sharing. These are the things that I need. This is not punishment. This is not control. This is, I'm taking care of me. And if you're willing to move into that space, great. If you're not, it's okay. And I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. You can say, I'm going to ask you to sleep on this or do this or whatever. But if there's anger, like with this kind of stuff, especially when you were talking about, physical safety breaches, like,
Right.
much safer for me to I'm just going to remove myself. I'm not abandoning you, but I'm just going to go take care of me. I think we like Troy Love's work a lot. And so it can be helpful to say, I'm not abandoning you. I'm taking care of me, so there isn't the, you're leaving, you always abandon me, all that drama. But I would encourage you, fine tune, like, work with your qualified therapist. I've done them in support sessions, like 25 or 50 minutes. I mean, whatever, get a little help, to identify your personal boundaries, so that you can, and of course you're nervous. You've got, addicts are really good at bullying through, boundaries, resisting change, like, this is what is known and this is what is comfortable, even if it's messy. And yeah, like, it will be hard. The system resists change. You are looking to implement change. So making sure that you have support, to be able to, internal boundaries. Again, Debbie McCrae, thank you. I value me. I need to take care of me. I am not going to betray myself, in order and get bullied by this person. They can try, but I'm taking care of me. So you're not alone. In fact, we're going to do a boundaries. She's going to do a boundaries work group starting late February. It's not posted yet. I keep hoping it will get posted, but it's not yet. But watch for that. Low cost online work groups. Really helpful. I'm super excited. I think this one's so needed. So consider that. Okay, next question. Um, I have been sober from porn for over a year. My betrayed ex-wife, who I am now back into relationship with, says I continue to hurt her and I must be doing this on purpose. I think we've had this question before. On purpose, because if you get it, then you would stop hurting her. I know that the intent doesn't matter, but hurt is hurt. How can you respond to her in situations like this, that my intention was not to hurt her, I asked her about the hurt and she's asked me to stop questioning her hurt. What is her attachment bid in this situation?
Yeah. So what I would do if I were you is I'd go to her and say, "Hey, when I ask you about your hurt and you tell me to stop questioning you, tell me why that is. Like what I would ask her, what do you feel like my intention is in that moment?" Um, Too often any of us rush in to try and explaining our intention. And the problem is that the intention is important when the other person wants to know it. But you can't share your intention without the other person wanting to know it, without actually leaving the other person feeling dismissed. And so um, I often will tell people to ask, I want to share my intention, but I'm worried you're going to hear it as dismissal. Would it be helpful if I shared it? And if she's like, no, okay, then what part of your hurt do I not understand? What part are you wanting me to hear that I'm not hearing based on your experience? um Her attachment bid is to get closer, right? She's telling you, can you hold my hurt? And quite like in her mind, and I think that she's saying, if you loved me you wouldn't hurt me. And that, although I appreciate that sentiment, I'm not sure that that's always true. In some
It's
sense
never true. Yeah, it's like the opposite. Yeah.
correct. Like we hurt each other by being in intimate relationships with each other. It's going to happen. Obviously, understanding somebody's intent, knowing they're not meaning to, can lessen it. But and I think as a couple, if I say to my partner, "Hey, I want to do this thing. I know last time you were hurt by it. I don't want to do it with and hurt you." Like how can I do this thing and not hurt you, right? And the bid there is for you and I to connect and me not to hurt you, but I also work on getting my need met in this way. I really think you have to slow down as a couple, including having the conversation about when you get hurt and I try to understand your hurt. Does it feel like I'm getting curious, or does it feel like I'm questioning you in judgment? What is going on there? I think you're trying maybe to get too quickly into the intention and it's ruining the opportunity for connection for both of you. And she might be as well. I'm just not quite sure. So I hope that helps.
So Aaron Snow has shared on um, one of the webinars a few times a journal, like a couple's journal, because sometimes when you're talking, if someone's not able to be fully present, you're not saying things exactly the way you want to or whatever. And so she's shared, and this can work, where couples write out, hey, this is, just whatever you're curious about what it is, I feel hurt, whatever. And that can go back and forth, within 24 hours or whatever it is, and that could give you the opportunity to really look into things and, and expand the thinking on this, and it's challenging because, you're getting back into a relationship that had been fractured, like, it's an ex, like it wasn't just like we've separated, it's an ex, and so like there's way more in
Oh,
this.
there's so much history.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah. Go
I
ahead.
think most couples would do well in almost every situation, and I'll put a caveat in here, like in the situation of abuse, this wouldn't count. But in almost every situation, if we just slowed down, even before enacting a boundary, like, let's just pause. Let me figure out what my need is before I hurry and tell you this boundary because you've hurt me. Like, if we could slow down, I've hurt you. I'm not going to react. Let me just try to understand what happened. And then I'm going to come back to you. Sometimes it's in an hour. maybe it's the next morning. Like, just slow down. Almost always, you guys will not be harmed by pausing instead of reacting. And the exception there would be in the case of abuse. Uh, don't slow down, get out.
Call 911. Yes. And run out the door. Yes. Okay. I'm the betrayed. The topic today, power imbalances and dynamics, reminds me of a main focus of my partner's acting out. In his acting out online during our relationship and in an in-person relationship before me, he called himself a dom and he searched for submissives. In what he viewed and acted out, the daddy brat dynamic and boss young employee were what he seeked out. Is this because of desiring to be exploitive in our relationship, sexually and otherwise? He's mild and people pleasing unless he's angry, even though I encourage him to stand in his power and have asked him to be more assertive and exploratory in our bedroom. Post discovery, he labeled our sex life vanilla, even though he is the reason for that. Note, I was clear with him from the beginning that I'm into power play, but I have strong feelings against the daddy brat dynamic because of role played incest and control power dynamic as opposed to power exchange.
Okay, so there's a lot here.
Correct.
And I will say that I can't comment on what it means for him and what it means for you, right? Like, but I think it's awesome. We'll get to this in however many seminars later. One of the sexual health principles is shared values, and shared values I'm coming to learn isn't that we share the same values, it's that we explore the values together, we express them to each other. And so it sounds like in a lot of ways you guys have had a lot of really good expression of values around your sexual relationship and what things mean and what you each desire. And so good job to both of you. Um, I'm trying to figure out the question as far as him desiring to be exploitative. I can't answer that. I mean, if he were in my room as a therapist and you guys were in here as a couple, we could explore what that means for him. Again, most people aren't meaning to be exploitative. It could be a way for him to he doesn't know how to exercise power in a healthy dynamic, and he just goes to people pleasing, and that's a dynamic he might have learned, and he only feels like he can do it in a situation where he's not in a healthy relationship with you. And so that's something I think the two of you could spend time exploring together to go, instead of, hey, you need to stand in your power, what prevents you from standing in your power? What would it look like for us to enjoy this as part of our sexual relationship instead of uh, you feeling like you can only act out to get this desire met? So, I mean, there's a lot of awesome possibility there for the two of you, and I can hear you like he might have been using like, oh, our sex is vanilla. Well, that sounds like a really bad excuse for going outside the relational agreement, and I would feel pretty upset about that if I were you. And so, but I hear you saying, hey, the limiting factor on my end seems to be you. So, but we as a couple, and at least him, could explore in therapy like what that's about and what would it look like for him to, using really good communication and really good consent between the two of you, enjoy that in your own personal relationship. I love this. But I don't know that I can answer those questions because it's going to take some really good therapy.
And there are times, and this feels like one of them, and I don't know, but a sex therapist who understands sex addiction might be the
But
right fit. Go ahead.
well, and I mean, that's the framework that
Mm-hmm.
I'm coming from now
Mm-hmm.
is
Right.
because I've been studying sexual health
Mm-hmm.
and I've been a CSAT.
Mm-hmm.
And so you finding a good sex therapist who understands, and most sex therapists will refer to it as out of control sexual behavior. They won't typically refer to it as sex addiction, but it's, essentially that's what's going on. So they refer to it as out of control sexual behavior. And it was behavior that violated your relational agreements, and they will be better able to help you guys explore this.
Okay. So the next one. I often felt as though sex with my partner was consensual even after discovery, but as time went on, I now feel as though none of these encounters were consensual. I consented to unprotected sex within a monogamous relationship. That was not the case. I was exposed to countless partners of his unknowingly. Am I right in thinking that there is zero consent on my end?
Well, in the sense that you were consenting to the relational agreement you had at the time, and when you discovered that that relational agreement was not being kept on your partner's part, then yes, you are basically saying post consent, I revoke it because I was not aware. We'll get to one of the sexual health principles later in another webinar on prevention, and essentially you were exposed to and not you didn't have the right to prevention, and so yes, you are essentially saying I don't consent, it's not consensual anymore because the all the information you weren't aware of what you were consenting to, so you can't consent to something you're not aware of, and so you do have a lack of consent, and I think that is absolutely it's not just justified, it's an accurate experience.
And I can only imagine the grief in all of,
Oh,
and I mean, grief, there's so much grief in all of this in betrayal, but the grief of that, of like, this thing that I thought I had has been taken in this way.
right.
So I would encourage you to do your grief work around that as well. Betrayed partner several years since last discovery, working on rebuilding, good individual recovery, and doing couples work. My partner often takes attempts to have conversations about our relationship and trying to connect as attacks. He's
Tax, yeah.
avoidant and along the lines of consent. I wouldn't know what issues he has, as he would keep them to himself and would covertly build up resentment against me and get his needs met through acting out. Is this the kind of in this kind of dynamic, what needs to, I don't know.
The next one
Oh, to
says
happen to
happen.
make a healthier dynamic. What for the betrayed partner and what for the betrayer?
Okay, so the moves that I would take is it's a technique that it's called slicing it thinner, where I might practice coming to my partner and saying, "Hey, I do want to have a conversation about our relationship. I do want to actually try and connect, but I'm afraid that you're going to hear it as an attack when I don't mean it that way." And I'm going to stop and stay there and have a conversation about that. And it feels tedious, but I would start having more conversations about teach me more about why you felt attacked in this conversation. Tell me more about why you feel attacked in that conversation. Now, if I were to isolate him for a second, most likely there's some type of internal or external shame going on, and he needs to build some tolerance to his own internal or external shame, and so that he can start to hear, oh my gosh, my partner loves me and cares about me and isn't trying to belittle me. They just want to be close, but that takes work, and so I think that that can be really helpful. You as a partner can't instill that in them, right? Like you can say it to them, it might help a little bit, but I would focus more as a partner on figuring out how to slice it thinner and slow down, um, and get into that space of how, basically, why do you feel like an attack? How can I show up? How can we work together on this so you don't feel attacked? Because if I can't ever share what's going on inside of me and you always feel attacked, neither one of us are going to feel satisfied in this relationship.
And I just popped the work groups on Why Men Struggle to Love with Dr. Eddie Caparucci. I like that one came to mind. Out of the Doghouse could be a fit too, but those two could be useful for him, looking at at some of these things too. And with a group of people that isn't you, that that could have conversations, and there might be some insights as well. So Dr. Eddie's, he only does it twice a year, and the next Wyman struggle starts this week or this next week.
So we don't have a ton of time left. We're gonna have to save some of these,
I
but
will
I
do
am
that.
curious. What somebody said, yes, Tammy got it. I
Oh,
won't
it
have
was the one when we said you're not sure about exploitive versus healthy boundaries, so
Yeah, and so it's interesting because I was wondering if you said this and you meant it. I won't have sex if you are going to act out not go to recovery meetings, etc. And I'm like, did you say that?
No, no, no. I think this partner is saying that. I won't have sex with you. Yeah, yeah. Let me
Oh,
keep helping here.
yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, because here's what I would actually do. I would, if I'm the partner in this situation, I'm not going to make it about you acting out and you going to recovery meetings, because them acting out and them going to recovery meetings is not your need. And so, like, if you think about it, if I don't feel appreciated, my need is to feel appreciated. If I don't feel appreciated, that might block the desire, or as Emily Nagoski puts it, that might put the brakes on my sexual arousal system, right? And so I'm saying to my partner, I need to feel appreciated. I know that when you act out, my feeling of appreciation goes down. I'm not punishing you for acting out. I'm telling you that my desire diminishes. And so the more you act out, the more I feel unappreciated, but I'm not bringing that to you to tell you you better not act out, otherwise I'm not having sex with you. Like, naturally I'm not feeling the desire because I don't feel appreciated, I don't feel valued, right? And so I know that for whatever reason, when you go to a recovery meeting, I feel a little bit more safe. But man, I'll tell you what feels even better. If you go to a recovery meeting and when you come home, you share with me like some of the insights and things you've learned, I feel like so much safer with you. Now, that doesn't mean that we're just going to up and have sex afterwards, but like ultimately, like these are the things that build trust. And the more trust we have in the relationship, the more my desire to be sexual goes up. And so this is that part where I think and so if that's what you're describing, I'm like, oh my gosh, totally. That's beautiful. But sometimes we phrase it in a way that's like, you need to act out less or not at all. You need to go to recovery meetings. And it's this you, instead of coming back to, well, I know that I'm not feeling a desire. I know that I'm not feeling loved, cherished, appreciated, whatever the need is going on for me. And so the tool of sex isn't attractive to me. And so going into that space, I think is anyway, just much healthier as a couple. I hope that helps out.
Yeah, it does. I captured the questions. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, everyone. Matt will be back. We'll pick these questions up and he'll continue on with the series.
Hey,
Yeah.
I think the next one is like February 12th.
I don't know.
No, it's not. Never mind. It's the 8th.
No, because you would be on the 14th because you're the second and fourth.
Oh, my brain isn't even functioning at the moment. What month am I looking at?
Why don't you email me and I'll watch the
Okay.
calendar, everybody. We'll
I
make sure that we get this adjusted.
I can't do the 14th. I already know that.
There you go. It will be taken off the 14th and we'll see you back on the 28th.
28th. See you guys.
All right. Bye. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.